Arizona PBS is proud to support Indian Country Today. For 6 decades, we've provided television programs and now digital content. But we go beyond that, sending outreach teams across Arizona, offering workshops in language and literacy, family engagement and community outreach, and supporting tribal communities with early learning and school readiness resources. Join us at azpbs.org.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalohungva. It's Earth Day. Here are the headlines from Indian Country Today. The Indian Collective is endorsing the Green New Deal legislation. Nick Tilson, who leads Indian Collective, believes the bill can help, which is why he's also endorsing the Civilian Climate Corps Act that's included in the bill. The non-binding resolution seeks to eliminate U.S. greenhouse gas emissions and transition away from fossil fuels. The bill lists projects that affect Indian country, like clean drinking water and monitoring air quality. It also includes a provision to secure local housing, which may help Alaska Native communities who need to move due to rising sea levels. The bill was introduced by Representatives Cori Bush and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey. President Biden is promising to put the country back on track to net zero emissions by 2050, and that's 20 years later than what's proposed in the Green New Deal. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland is reversing a series of orders from the previous administration that promoted fossil fuel development. The orders cover public lands and waters, and Haaland issued a separate order that prioritizes climate change in agency decisions. The moves are part of a government-wide effort by the Biden administration to address climate change. The president will soon hold a virtual global summit on climate change. Haaland said the new orders do not affect the Interior Department's ongoing review of proposals for oil, gas, coal, and renewable energy development on public lands and water. A national Native organization is calling for the inclusion of urban Indians in an upcoming legislative package. The National Council of Urban Indian Health is urging Congress to address Indian country's infrastructure. In a letter, the health organization includes several requests for investments into the 41 urban Indian organizations. These groups operate 77 health facilities across 22 states and provide high-quality, culturally competent care to the urban Native populations. Unfortunately, compared to other federally funded healthcare systems, parity issues really affect the services and operations. For example, these urban health centers do not receive any federal funding for facility infrastructure, which makes repairs and renovations difficult. Well, if you're worried about your heart health, there could be an app for that. A smartphone app is now being tested to check for heart problems. In a study at the University of Oklahoma, the app accurately detected the disorder in American Indians. Indian country is at high risk for common heart rhythm disorder called atrial fibrillation, and it's more than any other group affected by this. And overall, Natives also have higher rates of obesity, diabetes, and high blood pressure, which are all risk factors that increase heart problems. The app is a smartphone-based electrocardiogram screening, and it measures the electrical activity of the heart and can find abnormal heart rates or rhythms. Native participants underwent a 30-second screening using the mobile device paired with a tablet or smartphone at the clinic. Doctors in the study say this low-cost approach has real potential to help improve heart health for American Indians. The next step is a randomized controlled trial to get more data. Well, an art student's thesis will take you back in time to meet her ancestors. Nicole Neidhart put her project online. It's called Stories Held in a Time Traveler's Hogan. A hogan is the traditional home for Navajo people, and she drew stencils that represent her family. She says the idea came from a trip up to the mountains. She wanted to create a space where Navajo culture was being represented.
One of the ways that I could do that was by bringing Navajo time travelers with me. So that's why I started thinking about designing these mirror mylar stencils of Navajo time travelers and bringing them to the land and visiting with the stories and creating like portals on the land, or like spaces of fluid time energy where we could like visit with our ancestors and our future ancestors.
Her website, NicoleNeidhart.com, also has a 360 video that shows the mountains where the drawings were made. She just received her Master's of Fine Arts from Ontario College of Art and Design University in the Interdisciplinary Art, Media, and Design program. Well, a program premiering on Peacock TV today is co-written by a number of Indigenous writers. Rutherford Falls is about two lifelong friends who find themselves at a crossroads. Besides being written by natives, it also stars several native actors, such as Jana Schmeiding and Michael Greyeyes. The episodes are filled with native humor. You can read the full story by Vincent Schilling on our website, IndianCountryToday.com. Just look for the headlines, Rutherford Falls is the best thing I've seen on TV. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thalahungva. 50 years ago, Senator Gaylord Nelson from Wisconsin created the first Earth Day.
What does this day mean to Indigenous people? We'll talk with one woman who works in climate justice when we come back. It's Earth Day, and we acknowledge our responsibility as caretaker of Turtle Island. Joining us today is Jade Begay. She's Dene and Pueblo from New Mexico and leads Indian Collective's work in climate justice. She recently was appointed to the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Welcome, Jade.
Good morning, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start by talking about what the work is with the Environmental Council.
Yeah, so there's a lot to talk about when it comes to the trajectory of this council. We'll be working with the administration for over the next 4 years. So the work is very much going to be developing and evolving. But, you know, at the core, this council, for the first time ever, brings the voices and the perspectives and expertise of environmental justice communities into a formal advisory role for the White House.
We know that we have to increase the velocity of change for climate to be able to get to where we need to go. How does that message get out now to a broader audience?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's up to groups like NDN Collective and the various, you know, many grassroots organizations and also Indigenous-led nonprofits to be out in our communities, working at that community and local and grassroots level to make sure that our people, our Native communities and our Indigenous communities are aware of what's happening and what's moving in terms of environmental justice and climate action. It's been a really exciting almost 100 days with the new administration, and there's so much to track. And I think it's just up to us to really communicate and keep people posted. And that's something that we're really committed to at NDN Collective, is providing those types of materials and resources and building that literacy around climate change and around environmental justice for our communities and how people can be involved, whether that's organizing or doing direct action or working at the policy level.
Yesterday, the president set some really ambitious goals for greenhouse gas reduction. And to get there, we're going to have to make changes across the board. And I'm struck with much of our conversations is about things like pipelines and infrastructure. But to get to where we need to go, we need to start making choices individually. And that's a much tougher order.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think that's really what it comes down to for me. I'm asked this question all the time. You know, what can allies be doing? What can communities, cities be doing? And I really like to bring it down to the personal and the individual level in really rethinking and questioning and investigating how our daily lives are intertwined or dependent on things like the fossil fuel economy, and how much can we reduce that dependency and liberate ourselves from those kinds of attachments or those kinds of dependencies, so that we can make space for more practices in our daily lives that are, I guess, more harmonious with our goals around reducing emissions and pollution.
Do you think the pandemic has kind of given us a window into how that can be done? I mean, we've seen the drop as people have stopped commuting.
Oh yeah, totally. I think, that was one of the, and, let's be sure to say that, we really didn't need a pandemic to show us these things. And, it would have been much better for us to come to these conclusions without so many people getting sick or dying through this pandemic. But that is something we learned when people stopped traveling, when people stopped commuting, like you said. And I think what we also learned is the power of our local communities and mutual aid, and learning, better, more efficient ways of getting each other resources, that we don't need to make a trip to the grocery store every other day, that we can actually, stock up and prepare for weeks, months on end. And how can we, again, adopt these types of practices into our daily lives, so that we're reducing, again, whether it's travel or, putting out emissions with our vehicles. And yeah, those are some of the great lessons that I guess we learned from the last year or so.
One last question is, how do we make this aspirational, where people get to think, wow, this could be really a better future, a future that's practical, that works for us, that is better for the climate, but also better for individuals. We're healthier, we just have a better life.
Yeah, I think our communities have for a long time been put between a rock and a hard place. We've had to really, especially our tribal governments and councils, we've had to choose between a livelihood or, putting food on the table, or environmental justice or food on the table. And I think we're trying to demystify and break that myth now, so that we can have both. And I think we can have both of those things with, clean energy, clean jobs. And I'm excited that the administration is really committed to those types of goals.
Thank you so much, Jade Begay. It's Oscar weekend. In recent years, there's been a move to call out Hollywood for its lack of inclusion. The hashtag #OscarSoWhite has been trending in recent years, but nearly 50 years ago, before social media, a young Native woman walked on stage and gave a speech protesting the treatment of Native Americans. Sacheen Littlefeather refused the Oscar on behalf of actor Marlon Brando and delivered his comments to a stunned audience. Sacheen joins us now. Welcome, Sacheen.
Hi, thank you very much, Mark. I'm glad to be here with Indian Country today.
Such an iconic moment. Everyone recognizes that moment, and even 50 years, it still has staying power. I'm wondering, how much do you think has changed in 50 years?
That's a good question. I think that for now, that the inclusion of people of color is just starting to bloom. I think for people of color, we have not had a big inroad until recently. I know in the past, when I was a young person in the media business, that Connie Chung, when she was an Asian news anchor for CBS, this was so unusual back in the early 70s that she made the cover of Time magazine. So the inclusion of women and women of color was a very unusual situation way back then. So the inclusion of Native people, Black people, brown people, et cetera, was not at all common. You see anchor people on the news, you see people of color in movies, et cetera, are coming to the forefront at long last.
There's a new documentary about your activism, and let's take a look at it right now.
The winner is Marlon Brando in The Godfather.
When I went up on the stage at the Academy Awards in 1973, I was 26 years old. Because it was so shocking, other people could not believe what happened that night. And they're still talking about it today, 45 years after the fact. I was the first woman of color, the first Native Indigenous woman to ever make a political statement in the history of the Academy Awards.
So much of that night focused on Marlon Brando and what he wanted to say about Wounded Knee. And I think that was an important message even now. But I'm also struck by what you did after the Oscars and the conversation you had with people almost immediately after the cameras turned off. Maybe tell us about that.
Well, I am the first woman of color, the first Indigenous woman to ever use the Academy Award as a political platform to speak out about the stereotype of Native Indigenous people in film, in media, and in television, and also the recent happenings at that time at Wounded Knee in 1973. Before that, there was a total blackout, a media blackout. And what was happening was that the FBI, not full-blood Indians, but the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, led by J. Edgar Hoover, was planning on sending everybody who was involved at Wounded Knee to a place like Guantanamo Bay, where they would never be heard from again. And when Marlon decided to mention Wounded Knee at the Academy Awards, and my delivering the message for him, that broke open that media blackout, because that was the first time in television Academy Award history that award ceremony was broadcast via satellite throughout the whole world. Millions of people saw that presentation. Before, it had just been broadcast throughout the United States. So all the world's media came to Wounded Knee and spoiled the plans of the FBI. And they were very, very upset about that. So I got boycotted as a result. I got blacklisted or red listed as a result of that. I could not be hired because the FBI told a bunch of lies about me, that I wasn't Indian, that I rented that dress, it was a costume, that I was not to get a job in the industry again, and so on and so forth. So it was a very difficult period for me. And as a result, I had to change careers, so to speak, and go back to school. And I majored in nutrition and health education, etc., and worked diligently in becoming a AIDS advocate, worked with Mother Teresa of Calcutta in hospice work, and also in my own community here in the San Francisco Bay Area, in a lot of fundraising activities and so forth like that for health and youth-oriented causes. But I've been working diligently for these last 50 years. I also now have cancer, terminal cancer, and my other half of 31 years, Mr. Koshway, he also has cancer with me. So we together have our chemotherapy treatments, and we've lived a good life together. We've shared a lot in the community, and we share a lot with one another. And we will go hand in hand to the spirit world. We don't know when, of course, but you know, it's one of these things when we look back on our lives that we've given a lot, and we've lived our life honestly. And when we look at one another and we smile because we know that things have been good.
Thank you, and a lot of smiles for you. It's great to see you.
Nice to see you too, Mark.
And we'll be right back. It's been a year without powwows due to the pandemic. And now some organizers of some of the largest powwows are having to make hard decisions, canceling for a second year or going virtual. Natasha Brennan is a freelance journalist, and she recently wrote a story about this dilemma. She joins us now. Welcome, Natasha.
Hi, good morning.
So being social is at the heart of many of our traditions. How has this unfolded with the powwow season last year and going into this one?
Yes, definitely. Being around family and friends is something that so many of the people that I talked to said that they miss the most, especially about virtual powwows. I did talk to some people who've gone to socially distant in-person powwows that have been happening, but some of the largest in the nation, like Gathering of Nations, which happens this weekend, are going to be virtual for a second year. And so that really means connecting on Zoom, connecting on Facebook, like the Celebrating Life powwow that happened in Michigan last month, started on Facebook. And so many people are saying that, they miss their family, they miss their friends, and the food, which is something you really can't get with a virtual experience. And all of the organizers that I spoke to are saying that 2022 is their year. They already have their arenas reserved for next year, and some are even starting to sell tickets. So we're really looking forward to powwows happening next year and being able to connect in person. But virtual for now seems to be like one of the biggest ways that people are trying to connect.
Well, and even planning for this summer, some of the challenges are that, yeah, you could probably get away with a small venue powwow, but that means people traveling, that means people doing all kinds of activities that aren't quite as safe. And it's a dilemma for folks, I think.
Yes, correct. There's quite a few in-person powwows in Michigan and all over the nation that are expected to happen later this summer. For example, another gathering, not necessarily a powwow, but the Res 2021, which will be happening in Vegas. It's an economic summit. I spoke to Chris James, the president and CEO of the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development, and they'll be hosting their summit in person this year. They're normally expect 3,000 to 4,000 people. So this year they're expecting quite a few. They're offering in-person and virtual attendance, but Chris James told me that pretty much everybody's coming in person, and it's, a international event.
Right. Well, and an event like that, networking is so critical, and that's hard to do in a Zoom room.
Yes, definitely. But a lot of organizers are saying that they're happy that the vaccines are rolling out. They're encouraging members who want to join to take the vaccine if they want to come in person. And then, of course, the virtual powwows don't always happen virtually. There are people behind the scenes who need to be there in person. So they too are socially distancing and making sure that they're taking precautions. And then also on top of that, the Central Michigan powwow actually was able to have a food vendor. So they took a lot of precautions in order to be able to serve people, something that they really haven't had in over a year.
Well, you think about all of the side businesses associated with powwow and how, well, everything from contest awards to vendors, whether it be food or art, and all of those have been really challenged in this environment. It's hard to make a living.
Yes, definitely. I spoke to a bead artist, Jennifer De Hoyos, who told me that her business has mostly been on social media. I spoke to a couple of other people who are doing, the virtual powwows where they are selling all online. Gathering of Nations will have a virtual vendors fair the Central Michigan Powwow had a they called it the Shopping Powwow Network. It was very QVC style with vendors putting their items up to the camera and, hopping on Facebook Live and telling people about it. And then also, the food and pretty much everything else. I also talked to some native royalty like Miss Indian World Cheyenne Kippenberger, who told me about how she just had to, go virtual. And it's been really difficult, especially the fact that, Gathering of Nations Miss Indian World won't be having a Miss Indian World this year. So there's a lot of issues about, the pandemic and virtual powwows, and especially native royalty and food. You can't really do.
We only have a few seconds, but this weekend is Gathering of Nations, and it's going to be virtual.
Yes, correct. This weekend, check it out. It's going to be one of the world's largest powwows, and it's all virtual this year.
Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. Thank you for watching. We will be back with another edition tomorrow. I'm Mark Trahan.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
Indian Country Today is produced at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
This is Indian Country Today.